The CEO had always received glowing reports from his managers, but something didn't sit right. He knew the company was at a crossroads, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there were untold stories, frustrations, unmet needs, and perhaps a disconnect between the leadership and the employees. So, one morning, he made an unannounced visit. He threw on a plain shirt and jeans, blending into the crowd as best as he could. He entered the building like any other employee, greeted by the hum of a bustling office. As he made his way through the hallways, he could feel the undercurrent of tension in the air. Employees typed away at their desks, heads down, while others quietly gathered in small corners, engaging in whispered conversations. Despite the smooth exterior, there was something off. The CEO felt an overwhelming sense of being an outsider in his own company. At lunch, he watched as employees sat in cliques, venting their frustrations over the food spread. They spoke about their managers with disdain and wondered aloud if the higher-ups even knew what it was like to work in the trenches. The CEO felt the weight of their words. By the end of the day, he had witnessed enough to know that something had to change. The deeper he went into the office, the more he realized how out of touch he had been with the everyday struggles of his employees. The realization hit hard. His company had been thriving on paper, but its heart and soul were fading. The CEO made a point of sitting in the break room that day. He didn't want to be seen as an observer, but as someone who truly wanted to understand the realities of his employees' lives. As he grabbed a coffee, he noticed a young employee, mid-20s, sitting alone, stirring his drink absent-mindedly. The CEO took a seat next to him and struck up a casual conversation. At first, the young man was hesitant but then began to open up. He started by mentioning how long his work hours had become, working overtime with no real acknowledgement. He described the pressure of having to constantly prove his worth to managers who didn't seem to care about the struggles he faced on a day-to-day basis. The CEO listened intently, his heart sinking as he realized how little he had known about the true work environment. This wasn't the company he had envisioned. His company was supposed to be one that valued its people, but it was clear that had been lost in the pursuit of profit and growth. As the conversation continued, the employee revealed how employees felt invisible, unheard. His words cut deep, and the CEO felt a mix of guilt and disbelief. He had been blind to the reality on the ground, and it was time to do something about it. Later that day, the CEO found himself in a different department, talking to another employee who had been with the company for over a decade. This employee was in charge of managing a team of creatives, but he spoke with frustration about how disconnected his team was from the leadership. The CEO asked what could be done to improve communication, and the employee responded with an idea that caught his attention, something completely different from the traditional top-down approach the company had always operated under. "What if we opened up the lines of communication?" the employee suggested. "What if we allowed employees to have a direct voice in shaping decisions, even at the highest levels? Imagine if feedback wasn't just a formality but a core part of the way we do business." The CEO was intrigued. He hadn't considered the power of direct feedback loops before. It was radical, but perhaps that was exactly what the company needed. He knew it wouldn't be easy to implement, and it would likely shake up the status quo, but he also understood that the current model wasn't working. He left the meeting energized, the idea taking root in his mind. This was the beginning of something bigger. That evening, the CEO sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights below. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on him. He had listened to the employees, heard their concerns, and seen their pain, but the magnitude of the changes he was considering terrified him. The traditional model of leadership he had followed for years had kept the company afloat, and now, he was about to challenge it. Could he risk the stability for the sake of progress? He walked over to his desk, glancing at the reports that had been carefully laid out for him. Everything looked perfect on paper. But was it really? Or was he just too afraid to look beyond the numbers? He thought about his employees again, those he'd met that day, and knew deep down that the company was ready for change. As the night wore on, he made a decision. He wouldn't let fear dictate his choices. The future of the company, and its people, depended on him taking that first step. He picked up the phone and scheduled a company-wide meeting. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, the CEO stood in front of the entire company. The conference room was packed, filled with employees who were unsure of what was about to happen. The CEO, dressed in a sharp suit, stood tall, projecting confidence. He cleared his throat, ready to speak. For the first time, he admitted his mistakes. He shared with them how disconnected he had been, how out of touch with the daily challenges they faced. He made a promise: he would not only listen but act. The company's leadership was going to change. They would adopt a more open, transparent approach. Everyone, from the ground floor to the top, would have a voice in shaping the direction of the company. The room was silent at first, stunned by the CEO's honesty. But slowly, a sense of hope began to spread. This wasn't just talk, the CEO was serious about making real changes. He introduced a new system where employees could anonymously submit feedback and suggestions, ensuring everyone could contribute without fear of retaliation. The CEO had expected a mixed reaction to his announcement, but nothing could have prepared him for the backlash he received. As the company shifted toward this new model of openness and transparency, some employees embraced the change, but others, particularly the senior managers, resisted. The CEO knew change wasn't easy, but the backlash was intense. At the next leadership meeting, a few managers voiced their concerns openly. They feared the company would lose its competitive edge if it became too flexible and accommodating. "We've built this company on structure and hierarchy," one manager said, his voice tinged with frustration. "If we throw all that away, what's left?" The CEO listened carefully, nodding, but he couldn't ignore the reality of the employees' needs. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but he also knew that in the long run, the company's success hinged on these changes. He spoke up, "I understand your concerns, but we are building a company that is not just based on profits but on the well-being of its people. Our strength lies in their creativity, dedication, and passion. If we don't invest in them, we'll lose everything." Despite the resistance, the CEO's resolve remained strong. He had made a promise to the employees, and now he was determined to see it through. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to fight for it. Despite the challenges and resistance, the CEO's commitment to his employees and the company's new direction was unwavering. A few months had passed since the announcement, and the changes were beginning to take shape. Employee feedback had led to tangible changes. Work schedules became more flexible, and departments were now encouraged to collaborate more openly, breaking down the walls that had once divided them. The CEO had even started visiting departments regularly, talking to employees and receiving direct feedback. During one of these visits, a senior manager approached him. This manager had initially been one of the most vocal critics, but now his tone was different. He shook the CEO's hand and smiled. "I have to admit, I was wrong," he said. "The changes have made a difference. The team feels more motivated, more engaged. We're working together better than ever." The CEO smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The road had been hard, and the resistance had been fierce, but the fruits of his labor were becoming evident. Employees were happier, more creative, and more productive. It was a new beginning for the company, and the CEO knew that they had only just begun to scratch the surface. 1 year after the CEO's decision to change the company, the transformation was undeniable. The company's culture had shifted from one of secrecy and detachment to one of openness and collaboration. Employee morale was at an all-time high, and productivity had skyrocketed. More importantly, the bond between the leadership and the employees had strengthened in ways the CEO never imagined possible. The CEO stood in front of the company once more, this time for a celebratory meeting. He thanked everyone for their commitment, hard work, and belief in the vision he had set forth. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment. "What we've done together is nothing short of extraordinary," the CEO said, his voice filled with pride. "We've not only transformed a company, we've transformed lives. And we've shown the world that a company built on trust and transparency can not only survive but thrive." The employees erupted into applause, their faces beaming with pride. The CEO knew that the future was bright, not because of the profits they had earned, but because of the people who made up the company. They were the heart of it all, and now, the company was truly alive in ways it had never been before.